We're here at the NASA Glenn Research Center. We'll be talking with experienced practitioners and leaders of the missions that NASA does and pull out some of the lessons from a career in NASA program and project management. We have two distinguished professionals with us today, Ann Over and Joyce Wahanan. And Ann, on my direct left, began her career at NASA at the Glenn Research Center in 1983. This is also when I started. I remember it was the Lewis Research Center at the time. And she was working on the Shuttle Centaur project, where she designed trajectories to Jupiter, Venus, and other locations. She's managed the development of 2 flights of large combustion science research facilities on the Space Shuttle, including the last flight of Columbia, and served as the branch chief for over 5 years, leading a group of project managers to develop space station experiments and technologies to advance human exploration. And after serving as project manager for the SCAN testbed project launched by Japan on the ISS in 2012, and returned to management as the division chief of the Glenn Space Science Project Office. In February 2016, she took over a new position as the NASA Deputy Manager for the European Service Module. You've done a lot of things.
33 years.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's been a very effective 33 years.
Yeah.
Working internationally, the European Service Module Integration Office, helping NASA return humans to the moon and on to Mars. She's one of our NASA certified program project leaders at a senior expert level. And it's been wonderful to work with Ann for a long time. We were talking about some of the stories. Joyce Wahanan has been employed at NASA Glenn also for 33 years. That seems to be the magic number. Holding a variety of positions. She began her career at NASA in engineering, working multiple projects, including the most significant being the hardware test and integration lead for the surface tension-driven convection experiment, which flew on the first STS Space Lab mission. She spent a considerable portion of her career working with international partners, including the International Space Station Phase 1 program with Russia and the Cryogenic Propulsion and Storage Transfer project with the French Space Agency, CNES. Currently, Joyce is the Bilateral Exchanges and Discovery Manager for the Orion program's European Service Module Integration Office. Her responsibilities include managing the hardware, software, and documentation exchange agreements between NASA, ESA, and the prime contractors, including Lockheed Martin and Airbus, that are needed for the development of the European Service Module. So thanks to Joyce. Both of you have had very obviously long and successful careers. You've done a lot of things working really complex programs and projects, doing engineering and also international collaborations and industry collaboration, which is a typical NASA kind of activity. So let me start with Ann. What brought you to NASA and what got you started in your career that we've covered?
Yeah, so like a lot of kids, I went to college. I was good at math and science, but I found my passion in rockets and airplanes. So I became an aerospace engineer. As you mentioned, I started with Shuttle Centaur program, which was a launch vehicle program.
Yeah.
And that was a huge imprint on me and my career because I started working schedule, intense, fun science projects out of the gate. And I really learned how to work as a team, the whole risk management and so on. And that really was a wonderful start to my career.
Just getting involved in the project.
Yeah.
What about you, Joyce? What brought you to NASA and what got you started to
Well,
your
I
journey?
was also a mechanical engineer, and coming out of school, I was interested in the programs that NASA offered. I grew up in the Detroit area and had worked with the automotive companies and co-opted with them during my college years. So I liked the idea of having big programs, something that was unique, that touched a lot of people's lives. And I think the space program does that, similar to what the automotive industry does too. So I thought there was a little connection there. And so I came in, I was offered a position in the engineering organization here at Glenn, which I thought was a great place for me to start because of the hands-on experiences I got early on in my career. So I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Right. One of the things that when I'm talking to people, I think there's a natural tendency to see NASA as, like any organization, it's kind of contained. But as your careers indicate, large part of the work is done in partnerships with internationals. A lot of the work is done with industry and supply chain. Most everything is done for universities. And particularly with your work right now, I'll go back to Joyce. What goes into making an effective relationship when you're working in international collaboration, where you're setting up a bilateral agreement? What are some of the lessons in terms of how best to work with other organizations?
Well, I think what is important starting out is to understand what everybody's needs are in the problem that you're trying to solve, whether you're trying to work out an agreement on exchanges. I mean, everybody comes to the table with something that they need out of it. So when you have 4 parties, in the case that I've been involved in, everyone has their own things that they bring in. They have some constraints that they need to operate under. So for someone who's managing that interchange, you really need to understand people's needs and their positions. I also think that you want them to participate in the conversation. So you need to have them feel comfortable. You need to help build these professional relationships with them. So there's a comfort level and there's a trust that's built up. So they're feeling free that they can communicate among the group. But as NASA, I think you need to provide a little leadership also for steering these conversations and discussions that you're having to work out the solutions that you need.
Right. One of the things I'll do is I want to come back to this because this is a key part of what you do, with maybe an example from a current or past in terms of how that works. But I know also, and you spent a large part of your career, obviously, in terms of working joint missions with industry, with international partners. That's a large part of your work in terms of program projects. How do you go about creating a successful relationship when you're working with people who don't work for you, who don't work for your, who are all around the world? How do you set that up?
So I think Joyce did a great job hitting on those fundamentals. What I find is there's a lot of influence, and where you have to start is with common ground, that you're all working on a joint project for a common purpose, right? And you do have different constraints. I've worked with fixed price contracts. I've worked with internationals who have completely different stakeholders. I've worked with projects that go all the way up to our US Congress, right? And so those are stakeholders. So I think keeping in mind what are your key fundamental goals, and then what are the roles and responsibilities, and then laying out a joint plan, listening to all inputs, right, to achieve those goals. And I guess the last thing is be open to change, because usually when I've laid out a plan, it changes like tomorrow.
Like every week, right?
Like every week, and you have to be agile enough to adjust over time.
Yeah, and so that's another thing to get back to, which I think is a key. I think there's an aura about NASA that people think, okay, we have brilliant people, they lay something out, it's right, and then it goes in that direction. And well, you know that you're having to adapt and change. And so I think the most successful people, they know how to learn in terms of responding in different ways. You talked a little bit about stakeholders, and so there's probably a different way you have to work with an international partner or industry that probably is aligned to a certain vision, and a politician may be in something. When you start a project or when you join it, do you have any techniques for how do you write down who the stakeholders are? Do you keep that to yourself? Do you have different thoughts about who you need to work with, just as a tip for others?
Well, so NASA has been very successful on our projects, and so we've got templates, we've got some guidance, we've got actual requirements, right? We give them the fancy numbers, 7120.5, 7123, right? And that gives a really nice foundation for how to lay out a project. And there are things like stakeholder document. And what I've found is that gives you a really nice foundation, but every single NASA project I've worked on in my 33 years is extremely unique.
Yeah.
And so be ready to tailor and adjust those guidelines, those requirements to meet what you need to execute.
Absolutely.
And so anyhow.
Yeah, and
that's
so
my
that
thought.
lays it out. And yeah, you're talking to the numbers, the 720, which is how we do programs and projects, and then
Right.
systems engineering. And
Absolutely.
from that, there are different tools and learning that you use.
Yes.
Go back to Joyce. When you're working with the international partners, are there any stories that you can share in terms of how things are working effectively, in terms of or how you get to that point, or any challenges that had to be addressed, that from collaboration, from communication? Or I'll ask that actually to both of you, but
Okay.
since you.
Well, I think I'm going to go back a few years when I was working with the Russians on the Phase 1 program for the Solar Dynamic project. And we were just starting out. We had some top-level agreements, but we really had not defined who was going to do what. We had, that the U.S. was going to provide the engine, the Russians were going to provide the solar dynamic collector. We really hadn't really tied together who was going to be the integrator, and who was going to do those integrated tests that would be, key to the success of making sure all the workmanship and that the system is going to function properly. So we were having a big joint meeting, and there were a lot of parties involved. You had contractors, you had the NASA, you had the Russian agents, and so and we were trying to work all this out, and there was a tendency for the group wanting to splinter off and work side deals, and I felt that this was something very important that I needed to do, was to pull all the parties to the table and to make sure that we all worked out collaboratively what the roles would be. And I knew what our needs were in the U.S. and also understood that the Russians also had to have some significant portion for themselves. We were able to broker a deal that I think everybody was happy with, but we did it in a manner that it was laid out for everybody to see. There were no, it was an open dialogue, and we worked out what made the best sense and the right sense for the parties involved. So that's my story.
It's a great story, because one of the things I've heard from different partners is, I guess, a plea of don't get hidden. Mm-hmm. If we can communicate what the problems are, what's going on, any project manager and engineer know there's always going to be an issue, mm-hmm. and so you're able to have people coming together and talking about what worked. Okay. Any thoughts, any examples that you're thinking about, Ed, in terms of the different missions? Or
So a lot of examples come to mind. One that I'll mention that's a little more recent is with the Europeans. So we're doing a very large test campaign out at Plumbrook Station. And when I look at lessons learned, I try to find success stories and emulate those success stories. So we have extremely good success story with what we're doing out there. I'm thinking, I've seen other areas where this is really hard. NASA, as Joyce mentioned earlier, needs to exert some leadership. So NASA is controlled the schedule, but because it's an ESA test article, they controlled the test campaign and the test procedure. And what we found to make it successful is there needed to be a project manager who would honcho the schedule, but yet have this extremely frequent communication to get buy-in from the team. And as soon as you built a success, success built on success.
Right.
And so they laid out a mini campaign, and wow, that really worked. And we got on schedule and on cost, and management's happy. We got technical what we wanted. Oh, let's do that again. And that's how I like to manage. I like to, create early wins, right, and then use that as a model for success.
Yeah. We were talking earlier in terms of how do you bring on board, how do you manage a change?
Yeah.
And really, a project is ultimately a change,
Sure.
On steroids, right? And so it's how do you have early victories? Because the team comes together, they come from different backgrounds. If they don't know each other, they're looking for those early signs of that we're being successful.
Sure.
So key things. I want to shift into the notion of risk, because one of the things that we hear about nowadays, so when we started at NASA, I think there's pretty much kind of one way you did a program, which was in a very disciplined. Money was placed on it, and you followed an approach, and it was in most cases, to minimize risk. Nowadays, there's a lot of focus in terms of, I guess, agile, do things faster, do things in a cheaper kind of way, and so there's a push for both innovation at the same time for, the need for a disciplined approach. And that's one of the questions I always get. What is it that leadership at NASA wants? Do they want us to be kind of innovative and coming up with different ways of doing things and maybe taking more risks, or do they want a kind of a disciplined project approach? So how do you approach risk? I think all of it goes through risk in a lot of ways. How do you approach the risk part of the equation when you set that up? And I'll let either of you to.
You can start it.
Both of you.
All right, well, I'll start. So, like I alluded to earlier, did a lot of flight projects. They're all unique. They all have tight constraints on technical, budget, and schedule. So it's got to work, right? So we become a little bit risk averse, but here's the thing. The best teams also, I don't know if innovation is the right word,
Right.
but I call it creativity, because what happens is you're executing your project, and how I said it changes tomorrow, there's a roadblock that comes up. And it's the creative person that learns how to knock down the roadblock or actually just go around it. And it's that creativity, you can call it innovation, but I've seen engineers rise to the occasion. As a project manager, you have to set up that environment to allow them to do that. And you have to accept the risk. You have to take that off their plate and say, okay, that's a really clever way to do that. It might have more risk, but I'm going to take it on me to take that risk.
Right.
Sometimes they come up with solutions I don't like.
Right.
I'm not going to accept that risk. Most of the time, it's a really clever way to do it. So I see risk and creativity working together for
Right.
success.
And both of you are typically working on large human kind of missions, and by definition, there's a pressure to be successful there. So
Yeah.
there's going to be an expectation of a disciplined kind of approach, while as if you were in a tech base or a research base, there'd be a different kind of an expectation.
I do have to comment on that, because
Okay.
it seems like in my 33 years,
Yeah.
that used to be the case.
Yeah.
But I've worked a lot of technology programs too, and I worked technology programs that have earned value management, and they had milestones, and the pressure was surprisingly similar.
Similar. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's morphed over time.
Yeah. Everything
'Cause,
is
yeah.
it's a constant movement.
Yes.
I also want to remember to come back to one of the things I think that's important that you talked about in terms of whether it's being creative or innovative or taking chances, is that there's an implication there that people can fail, that they can make a mistake, and so it's bounded, and it allows them to do that. So I want to
Right.
maybe get thoughts on that. I'll go back to Joyce. How do you use risk? How do you set up, or do you, you're working bilateral agreements, you're talking about how we're going to approach it. Am I right assuming that there is some aspect which gets into us thinking about what are the risks we're going to take, or how do we approach that, or does that not get perhaps into the discussions about exchanges?
Probably not so much for
Okay.
the exchanges, but if you want to look at the international flavor of a project, you will find that the Europeans, Russians, they all have a similar mindset as the Americans do, as far as how their process for managing risks. And so, but their approaches, some of their standards may be a little bit different. So I think the key there is, if you are involved in a risk discussion with them, and if they have a point of view, to also understand, again, the dialogue, understanding their approach, and then being able to voice your concerns to be able to work out the right risk posture for that.
Talking about it, paying attention to it, thinking about it. It's also an interesting thing that I gather that an aerospace engineer or a space person in another country is going to be much more like, a space person here at NASA, or an aerospace person here at NASA.
Lot
But
of
the languages
commonalities.
may be different in
Sure.
terms of how we talk about things.
To me, it's shades of gray
Yeah.
as far as the
Yeah.
risk. And one other comment, if I can add to the risk aspect, I've found that sometimes engineers, I think it depends on their environment that they grew up in, right? Grew up in literally at college, and then their first job, right? I've met more that are risk averse than risk accepting. I don't know other people's experience, but one thing I found that's helpful, it sounds simple, but the simple 5x5 risk matrix
Yes.
and the scoring, because you say, oh my gosh, I'm all worried about X. And I said, oh, teach me. Okay, let's look at how likely is it to happen? What are the consequences, and what can we do to mitigate it? And there's something about going through that tangible, even though it's somewhat subjective, the probability, it really helps us manage and get that risk in place. And it actually makes us all communicate on the issue, and also helps the engineer feel comfortable to move forward.
Right.
So that's been actually a very useful tool for me.
Yeah, I guess it's different, but it's probably like when you develop something, when you build something, when you prototype, it gives people a chance to talk and to agree or disagree or to articulate
Right.
what we're
Right.
thinking about.
Yeah, but I'd say risk management, the best aspect is a communication tool.
Right, yeah, I guess
That's my
that's the-
soundbite.
Yeah,
For you risk managers out there.
Yeah, it's about the
It's
communication.
about the communication.
So we have some folks here, and I have some questions from the audience. And one of the first ones I have is, earlier, we had a young professionals panel, young professionals starting their career at NASA. And they were curious about the ways to change or influence people and the organizational culture to adapt to a new way. And so you, throughout your whole career, you both had to influence, you have an idea, you have something you want to do. What's the best way, or what are some ideas for how do you change the system? How do you, how do you get a culture to move? How is it when you're proposing something, you found it to be, how do you get success out of a new way of doing things, or when you're trying to convince
been doing a lot of
management?
talking.
No, if you- please, go ahead.
Well, what I do, it kind of comes back to your stakeholder analysis.
Yep.
Well, we often think of stakeholders as these people sitting up here, right? The people above us. I look at stakeholders in a 360 mode. So Ed Hoffman, I want to have you change on something. I look at Ed Hoffman, what's important to you? Knowledge, good project program management, systems
Yep.
engineering. I try to frame things up to say, hey, here's a benefit for you, right?
Yep.
And this will make us, better as a team together, right? So it gets back to, what the relationship building, what's important to people. At the end of the day, sometimes there's a leap of faith,
Yep.
and people, you just have to say, trust me, right? Let's give this a try for X period of time. We'll try it for a month, say. And people can do that, and once they get over that change bar, a
Right.
lot of times it's very successful. So you try to influence, but at the end of the day, you kind of have to,
Yeah, you have to get it
a little
started.
shoving. I don't know. It's like your kids. Just try it, please. And maybe it'll work out. If it doesn't work out, give an honest-to-goodness retreat. Don't give a false retreat.
Right. So, I mean, a couple of things you're also talking about there is one is going to, what is it that people, I mean, if you're talking, what am I looking for? What's the common issues? What's in it?
Right.
And then if there's a connection there, and then if it's important enough, trying to look for a way to try it out. And if it's a short period of time and experiment, then if it's successful and it builds on itself, and if it's not, then you have to recalibrate.
Let's just pilot it.
Yeah.
It's not that bad.
Right. Any things with, again, from the standpoint of the international agreements or your work in terms of how do you, when you want to try to do something in a different way, and in some cases you may be even trying to impact your own agency's positions if you come with an agreement. There's the way that you can do that, or that's accepted within the organizational
I
agencies.
think the point to be made here in regards to working with the internationals and trying to bring about some change it is a little bit of a process that you need to go through. It's not as, you need to probably fully explain what you're looking for. You need to vet it at various levels to get it to the point where you can actually begin the implementation of it. So something that may be simple as to changing a format of the way a meeting is held, or the expectations that people should be coming in prepared to a meeting, or anything that you want to do. It just takes a little added extra effort and a little bit of patience to walk through it all, because there's just a
Yeah.
natural reluctance, I think.
Yeah, one of the things you got to have, I think that's, you're hitting on the thing of patience, is having that energy to keep trying to work
Yes.
something, because the natural tendency, I think, in most organizations, most people, is we've been doing it successfully. Why are we changing? So, if you don't stick to it, then that creates then it doesn't change, then it doesn't adapt to anything. Both of you well, I guess everyone who works a program or project, when I think about it, is working in teams, in different kinds of teams. How do you go about building an effective team? How do you build a strong team? And is it different when it's a team of people who are working for you at NASA Glenn vis-a-vis an international mission team? But how do you go about building a team, and what do you try to do when you come on board? What's your thinking? Maybe start with you, Joyce, on that.
Well, for building the team, I think, and if I put myself in the position as a leader of the team,
Right.
then I think that you need to work to establish the goals of the team, and also to set goals, objectives, lay out a path. But then you also need to make the work easy for the team. So you need to put the extra effort in, I believe, to help organize the working meetings, to gather the data so it's easy for reporting out, for people to know the status of where you're at, that it's there, ready access for them. It's not buried in a document. It's not whatever you're working on. So I find that for myself, being a good leader is to help the function of the team also, besides just setting the goals and carrying out through it.
Help them be successful, remove barriers,
Mm-hmm.
and make it easier to perform together.
Yes.
That's how you'd look at it. What are your thoughts when you take over a program or a team?
Right. So I think Joyce hit on a lot of the fundamentals. People need to understand the roles and responsibilities. They need to get their resources to do the work. So many of our teams these days are dispersed and distributed teams. I'm a big fan of at least one face-to-face meeting, so you can actually put a name with a face, even if it's international. And oh my gosh, I've worked with teams for like 6 months, and then I finally meet the person. And then after that meeting, just one meeting, I'm interacting on a new level. And so if I'm a team leader, I'm going to ask management for travel dollars to have at least one meeting. And it's that relationship building, because you got to lean on each other. The only way you're going to have a good team is knowing who can do what. It's kind of like a human chess game. Who can do what and who can lean on each other to be successful. And it takes a while to get to know people to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But I like to give people challenges, and get that synergy going. It doesn't have to be a competition, but it's, there's a lot of energy when you get those early wins, like we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's, to reiterate, I think one of the important things is there's so many tools or technologies for working at a distance, which are powerful, but I really believe from what I've seen in terms of research that it's so much more advantageous if people have had at least an initial meeting, or they get because then you can see, you can connect, you can go to dinner, you can create that, and so when you're doing things at a distance, it makes it more effective.
Yeah, but go ahead and use the tools, right? We
Right,
have
absolutely.
telecons.
Yeah.
I use texting, I use IM, there's different communication avenues, but again, it's getting used to who can respond to what.
Yeah. Well, it's the human dimension. We
It's the human
like to work with
dimension.
people we know, and so the tools are great. Probably after there's some kind of, so it's much easier when you see people, right, initially, and
Yes.
then after that you can do it at a distance and all that.
Yep.
Obviously, I do the Knowledge Act, Chief Knowledge Officer for NASA, and there's sometimes, there's a balancing in terms of that, which is one part of it is spending time on sharing knowledge, capturing lessons and making sure it's available to the team. And then the other part is the project manager. I have limited resources. I got to get things done. I got to move out. When you start a program or initiative, what thought or does thought go into? I know that there have been other people who've worked with these folks. I know that there's other experiences in terms of similar missions. How much or how do you go about capturing that initial knowledge that may be there? And then when you're in mission, do you think, or does the team think about what do we make shareable? Or
Right,
again,
right.
I mean, because it's a trade-off. It's not a straightforward kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
Any thoughts in terms of knowledge sharing,
You
knowledge?
had some good stories.
Knowledge
Why
approach.
don't you do that?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of knowledge sharing, and the easiest.
said that.
I mean, the easy. I mean, the low-hanging fruit. What I go after is the person to person.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, we're peers, right? We're all similar age, but in that example I gave for the Plumbrook testing, Europeans coming to the US testing in a NASA facility, we have another test article coming to White Sands. Well, one of the first things I said, wait a minute, this looks kind of similar, and I interviewed and extracted knowledge from my NASA Glenn colleagues, tell me about what worked, what didn't work, and then the next time I got together with the Europeans, I actually put together a little PowerPoint, here's all the things that worked,
That's great.
and I just passed along the knowledge that way, and they're like, oh, you know, as my eyes opened, their eyes opened, and so that was really wonderful. My other story is on a project that was called Connect, or Scan Testbed. We were very schedule crunched, very busy project, but we decided we're going to use our knowledge management office at Glenn. Okay, so what we use them for, most projects, flight projects, right? You build your hardware, then you test it, then you go through a thing called environmental testing. So you do vibration, thermal, EMI, and so on. And even though they're different types of tests, we had different test managers and different teams. So we actually did the vibration test, and then we brought the thermal test team, and we did a knowledge sharing workshop, and we actually identified those nuggets of knowledge to help with the next test. And it was facilitated by our Glenn Knowledge Management Office.
Okay.
And it was extremely helpful. We saved time and money doing that.
That's a great example of that.
But even though we were busy, you know, you think you're too busy, but it helps.
Well, it's a trade-off. I mean, if it's done right, then it saves time other places. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of it goes
Right.
back to the learning.
Yes.
You know, it's always hard. I remember when the training days
Yeah.
you started, I'd always hear, I don't have 5 days, I don't have, right?
Right.
And yet do that, and then hopefully it has an impact through the rest of a career.
Yeah.
So that's what I guess I'd like to think.
Yep.
So
Yep.
one of the questions we have from the audience is conflict in a team. So I don't know if conflict ever comes up,
No.
because
no,
everything is
no,
smooth and
everything's
easy
perfect, yes.
but how do you go about
Miles
dealing
all
with managing team conflict, and is it different when you're working internationally?
I think with the internationals, I think we all try to keep it up a level,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit, I think, between our communications with each other, which probably maybe in some of those closed door final negotiation sessions that might get a little heated, but from the working level, I think there really is an effort to be a little bit more polite and listening to the different points of view.
Yeah.
And
So
to
we work
negotiate it.
better,
Yes, I think
maybe
we
with
do.
others
Yes.
when we're working.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's something that struck
Yeah.
me when I first came onto the Rhine program, is that kind of environment.
And I think it is getting back to what Joyce said earlier, that our job as program and project managers is to eliminate barriers for the team.
Right.
When we've worked with ESA and the European Service Module and Airbus as a prime contractor, their number one tenet is cost, plain and
Okay.
simple. It's not technical because it's just what it is.
They're driven by, yeah.
They're driven
Okay.
by cost. So what happens, the technical teams have meetings,
Yep.
and maybe they come up with a clever solution, but it costs X amount of dollars, and they just get stuck. And so as a management team, we've said that's a huge conflict, and one resolution approach is you need more money, don't even argue, just come to management, right?
Yep.
And then we'll kind of work it out in those closed door sessions where it's not fun. We don't have money either, but you kind of work it out and you figure out what's the best path forward
Right.
for both parties.
Right. And also, I would assume you'd agree that out of conflict often comes innovative ideas, best solutions,
Always.
right? I mean,
Sure, yeah.
and so there's a danger in not being too polite.
Yes,
but,
yeah. We'll
you
say
know,
it costs too much money, go find another solution. And
Right.
I've had a technical team, oh, that was a $500,000 solution. They come up with a $50K solution.
Right.
Yeah.
Good job.
Frugal
Yes,
innovation.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's easy, then you don't have to change or adapt or potentially get better.
Absolutely.
So, working up. One of the questions we have here is, what can you tell us, particularly the young women in the audience, about being female in the NASA environment? and how has it changed over time? And any advice you'd have for, so women at NASA, how has it changed in 33 years? And, you know,
Well, I've got one quick story.
Okay,
So,
please.
So, you know, like most young women, I have a family, right? And back in the late 80s, I had my children, and I wanted to work part-time. I had this tremendous supervisor, his name was Frank Spurlock, and he argued that I could maintain a leadership position even though I was working my, I don't know, it was 28, 30 hours a week. And he actually had to argue with the, I don't know who it was, I'm not going to point fingers, right? But he had to argue that that was acceptable. Yeah. And indeed, I mean, in 30 hours a week, I did my day job, I just didn't do other volunteer activities. And he could see that. I think young men need the same benefit. But I have never had any problem at all being a female. The only problem was the multicultural with the Japanese when I was doing scan test bed. They were a little confused why the project manager and the deputy manager were both female. It was a little uncomfortable for them because they weren't culturally they weren't used to it. But we talked about that kind of thing in international project management. But again, once we met and they got to know us, they have a different gender, but they're engineers just like me.
Yep.
So to me, the gender difference is not as big as extrovert, introvert, risk averse, not risk averse. I mean, we're women, but there's bigger differences in people than the gender, you know.
Right. And also what you're seeing is more support, I guess, broader for, balanced life, I guess they would call it, being able to work, different ways, more common nowadays.
Yeah.
Any thoughts that you have, Joyce?
I think the NASA has been a wonderful environment for myself over the 33 years that I've been here. You see a lot more women around than when I first hired in. I remember one of the first days I was greeted as finally another woman on the floor, so that was fun. But I think I agree with Ann that the differences are more personalities, not so much gender as what you have. And I think you can have your family life, you can still be successful in your career, and you should, with the support of your family, with the support of your work family also, that this can happen and you can be very successful. I would tell everybody to try to do it all because it's possible.
Do it all, yeah. And so I guess that's part of the advice. The other question here is, what advice would you have? And maybe I'll extend it, for women project managers, but for project managers in general. What kind of advice specifically in terms of NASA? What would you, if you were, you do advise, you do mentor people. What do you tell people? Hey, this is something to keep in mind. This is, this would be helpful. Any thoughts of key tips?
Well, I think that it would be good to follow your passion. I think there is just so many different opportunities within NASA that as you grow, I would encourage you to get new work experiences because I think that helps you grow as a person, as a professional. And I've charted a very stepping stone course in my career that I have found to be very fulfilling. Right. And so that's what I think you should follow your passion, follow your strengths, and go out on a limb a little bit because you may be surprised at some of the paths that it may take you. So. Yeah,
take on your passion, enjoy what you're doing, and be comfortable with the journey.
Right.
Is one of the things.
Yeah. And I'm in violent agreement, follow your passion, what you're good at, and then find a place the organization needs that's matchmaking. One thing I've found in NASA that sometimes folks get in a single organization, right? And so you need to be very proactive to make those opportunities. I went to headquarters when I came back. It's just not handed to you on a silver plate, right? You have to go out and talk to people, talk to your mentor, look at, I think I kind of want to go this way. Well, gee, that person might be a good person to talk to. And you start mapping out and talking to enough people, you can find these really interesting pathways.
Yeah.
It's not going to be just given to you.
Yeah.
So I recommend be proactive.
Common theme of that proactivity is the relationships.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of the things we've heard over and over again, you know, support the relationships, nurture them, talk to people, be comfortable, you know, moving out and trying different things out. So I
Right.
think that's,
Right.
so, you know, one of the questions here is you both have very exciting roles on important international work for NASA. And what recommendations would you have for young professionals who want to work on these kinds of projects, international in parenthetical? So how does someone get involved in doing international work? How does someone end up doing bilateral exchanges between NASA and ESA?
Yeah, I think it was more of a stepping stone for me
Okay.
because I believe that I had started in the engineering organization, worked in the microgravity sciences, and then got up to the big programs for Space Station, and from there it just went on from there. But I think it's good to get a good broad base. I've experience with contract management, experience with the big programs, did a lot of hands-on, smaller scale work in the microgravity area. So those all build together to give you a good, solid foundation to take on
Right.
more responsibilities and represent NASA to the international community.
Take on different assignments, different work that have that path. Did you, was there a point where you said, hey, I want to do international stuff, or did the work you're doing kind of lead to that opportunity?
I think it was more the circumstance,
Okay,
led
the
to
latter.
that. My experience base kept pulling me back into that field, and it was enjoyable, so
Yeah, I would imagine, yeah.
don't mind it.
What about you, Ann? How do you?
Very similar experience. Now, I will say that I am worried about succession planning. And so, say Joyce's position, I'm Joyce's supervisor, right? And so I want to create opportunities for young and mid-careerists. And in fact, one of the things I've done successfully at Glenn is create what we call detail opportunities, where somebody can work maybe 6 months or a year, try something out. It gets that little nugget on their resume, so when they
Yep.
can apply for a new position, they're able to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's something.
Again,
I've-
getting the experiences, trying things
Yeah.
out. I mean, you hear just
Right.
from the introduction.
Right.
We've
If-
both been involved in a lot of different things, and that was
Sure.
a small component.
Yeah,
that
but
we led.
you can create opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
you have, when you were starting, or did you have a point where you said, I want to do international stuff, or did that also just evolve? Because I know some people,
Yeah,
people
no,
target things.
that involved. I wanted to do big things at NASA and make a big impact. And if you look at NASA programs, how
Right.
do we make big impact? Well, yeah, it's usually
Okay.
international.
Large collaborations.
Yes.
Another question we have, what, if any, were your toughest lessons learned regarding program and project management? So are there any things that were particularly tough, lessons that you had to learn in terms of running programs or projects? And I guess that could be, man, this didn't go as planned, or this was a lot more painful, or boy, I've spent a lot of my life this year working this thing, and boy, that's something I take away with me. Anything that stands out on really tough lessons, from the standpoint of working programs and projects?
Wow. Yeah. Do you have anything?
I'll let you
Before-
start.
Oh, you let me start. Oh, come on.
You're
So-
quick on your feet.
Yeah. Well, I think each project I mentioned earlier, each project is unique.
Yeah.
When I worked the scan test bed project, it was woefully underestimated how much time and money it would take.
Isn't that
And-
typical?
Yeah, I think that's happened before,
Yeah.
right? And the team was really disgruntled, or they were really, almost like heads down. And I didn't realize how long it would take to climb out of that hole and be successful.
Yeah.
I tend to be a little bit of an optimist. Okay, let's go ahead and get organized, and then we'll get on track. And it took a lot longer to get on track, but it all worked out very well.
That could
in
be.
the
I mean,
end.
there's been a lot of research that talks about one of the big challenges, for people who are leading or project work, that project people tend to be optimists.
Yeah.
There's thing of, optimism bias.
Yes.
We see something and we think, okay, we'll deal with that, and that's one of the, the things, decision-making styles to be aware of, is that there's a tendency to, I know I don't have enough money, but we'll get it done, or we don't,
Yes.
so that could be a, key lesson.
Absolutely.
So, I think you'd, what was I had something I was going to go with that. Actually, so
Do you
one,
have another one?
one of the,
Joyce?
well, I had a
Okay.
follow-up question.
Yeah.
So you two work together.
Yeah.
What do you like about working together? In other words, what do you value about the other person?
I'll go first. I value Anne's energy. I think her
Yeah.
enthusiasm and her ability to, she's really on the ball with things, as you can tell by just listening to her
Yeah.
today. So I think she's...
Energy and alertness.
Yes.
That's key. Yeah, that's really key.
Yeah, I think to me she's a leader that you can trust in, and you feel like you'll all be successful with her guidance. So that's what I enjoyed working with you.
Success and trust,
Yes.
that's good.
So what I like most about Joyce is her calm, cool intellect, and she gets these really hard problems, and then she just figures out a way to work them out, and is terribly successful.
Right.
I think I get a little more, I am energetic, but the flip side is you get excited about things, and I don't have as much patience, perhaps. But I love her patience and her ability to work with anybody. We've had a couple characters that are a little harder to work with, but everybody just loves Joyce, and they get the job done, and just a stellar, very fun. When I think my test with people, when you walk in the morning, are you tempted to go in and say hello to them, or are you tempted to walk by their office? I'm always tempted to go in and say hello to Joyce, because it's always rewarding for me.
That's nice. Yeah. So there's there's been a lot of stuff in terms of nowadays things are so complex, particularly in terms of programs, that for one person to try to be everything or do everything, it's not possible. So this notion of co-leaders, or having, people with different skills that kind of complement, is one of the things I'm hearing
Sure.
in terms of what you're discussing there.
Yeah.
You both seem fearless. This is what you seem very fearless out there, and very even-tempered. Do you have any tricks or recommendations for building your courage and keeping calm? So that's a good question, because the work you did is a lot of pressure in terms of you're probably seeing things, you have to raise it. You're dealing with, really, all different folks, political, everything. How do you develop the courage to be successful? How do you do the right thing? How do you develop that?
Well, that's a great question. I can talk about the stress aspect, because I see stress every single day, right? And the way that I work through stress, and I have my entire career, is my stress is reduced if I'm able to accomplish things and see a path forward. Progress. That's you kind of have to look at yourself, and that's a hot button for me to make progress. I say, oh my gosh, that bad thing happened. Okay, you can vent a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you vent for 8 hours that day, I'm not going to be less stressful at the end of the day. So, all right, I'll vent for my 5 or 10 minutes, or maybe more. You have to have people you can talk to, right? But then I'll say, okay, what can I do to influence or change that particular outcome so that the stress level will be reduced?
Okay.
And that seems to work for me.
Right. So you're looking at the situation, trying to understand it, and
Yeah.
then trying to, make changes to improve things.
Right.
And being able to see, and
Yeah.
I guess related to project management, ideally you're seeing progress.
Yes.
And so that would be a stress reliever and
Right.
way of dealing with
And
that.
the courage part, I mean, Joyce touched on it earlier. When I went over to Japan, I talked to those engineers. Oh my gosh, there's so much commonality.
Yes.
I go to Bremen, talk to the Germans, there's so much commonality. And if I talk to Robert Lightfoot, Charlie Bolden, there's commonality.
Right.
And I think people are people, and sometimes we artificially put them in a different
Yeah. Make
game.
assumptions.
We make assumptions, and I find that people within NASA, for sure, are very nice, very smart people, and I don't have a problem talking to anyone, because I really value everybody's opinion. it doesn't take much courage to do that.
Right. Well, I guess it does, but you're comfortable. You feel it's, I think it's important as a leader that you set a kind of an environment
Yeah.
where that happens. Because obviously we've had cases where people have been working, they've seen things not going right, and it didn't get raised. So there's that courage, but you
Right.
work it. It seems like your progress through the team, through the relationships with people. I guess
Right.
I'm answering for you, but
Yeah.
that's what
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm
people come
connecting.
up and talk to me.
Yeah. It's also somewhat of a learned
Yeah.
behavior too that you can get as you have your small successes. You grow in your confidence too. And so
Yeah.
it will all come, I think. And that's what's the great thing about the experiences you get at NASA is
Yeah.
that you really are put out there in a lot of different ways. And it teaches you to have confidence in yourself, trust your instincts, and to have that
progression
courage.
and the learning and the that notion of that you're making progress, and so you should be building in, I guess, little successes that become bigger ones, and
Yes.
that gives, I guess, maybe the courage to let's keep going in the direction. And both of you have talked about what I'll talk about, the fact that largely you're working with people who have a common vision.
Sure.
Doesn't
Yes.
matter, if you're working with Russians or Kness or the administrator, or you're dealing with people who want largely the same kind of a dream to come together. So there's that common kind of thing. So you both seem to, and this I guess is a follow-up, maybe in terms of the courage kind of thing, what you want to do with your teams, I'm guessing, and the people you work with, is creating an environment where they can raise anything, they can share any point, they can disagree, they can argue. How do you go about setting up a team or a group that they are comfortable sharing knowledge? Because we've seen examples where that
Right.
doesn't happen,
Right.
where it gets shut down. So how do
Yeah.
you, and is that something that you found that you just naturally do because
Yeah.
of who you do, or is there also a strategy of, hey, I got to make sure that these people are comfortable being courageous or communicating? How do you get that started?
Well, I
build that
think,
in?
trying to draw people's thoughts out of them and maybe even offering some of your own thoughts to get the conversation going and, opening it up for what do you think about that? I mean, that's one way to help get the
Right.
conversations going.
Asking for the,
Yeah.
talking about things.
And I know, at least with the program we're both working on now, the Orion program, every single formal decision, people are very good at making sure, that long pregnant pause, is there anybody that disagrees with this decision? And people will pipe up.
Right.
They will say why they disagree with it. And, as a leader, you have to, I think it was Robert Lightfoot, I saw him speak before he became so high in the agency, but he taught me something that has always kept with me. Listen to people without the plan to speak and respond. Because if you just listen to people where they're coming from, what their concerns are, it really, it sounds simple, right? But it really goes a long way, because if people feel they're being listened to and you've evaluated that risk, they can accept that you understand and you get it, but you're still willing to take that risk. So you respectfully, work that into your decision making.
No, that's great advice. Yeah, because it's ensuring that you're hearing what's going on, and then you can take the
Yeah.
relationship that way.
Right.
Wanted to ask a question in terms of critical knowledge. We'll come down, I guess, the final couple of questions. One of the things when I go to the different centers, one of the things I hear from folks working in engineering is we get so much guidelines from our managers, from leaders, particularly nowadays. There's so much information in terms of how do you do a project, how do you do a system, how do you do this, that it can become mental overload in terms of what to focus on. Are there certain things that if you had 30 minutes with someone who's going to be working with you, only have them for 30 minutes, you'd say these are the things you got to focus on. This is the critical. I mean, other things are obviously important, but this is like that top 10% that I don't want you taking your mind off of when we're working this mission. Is there, maybe not,
Yeah,
but
well-
maybe there's, is there any things that you would say, just pay attention to this or focus on these kind of things, and these are the things that that it may be things that keep you up or at night, things that you worry about. Is is it is it the relationships, the technology? Is it
Well, I think that may be job dependent too,
Right.
for what
Okay.
someone needs to focus in
Right.
on. And so I think, like in my case,
Yep.
we're always looking at, any kind of deliverables, things like that need to go back and forth. You've got like a 6-month window that you really want to focus in on and make sure that, because there's a lot that needs to get done in that time period to make that successful. So, I think you would just need to prioritize, I think, what's important on that particular task that you're working on and focus in on that.
Right.
And that would be from,
We also talked about, interpreted, but the notion that there's a time sequence in terms of a program. You have things that need to be done quickly. And then you have that over 6 months, this has to happen. And then you have a longer time frame. So keep in mind in that time frame. Any thoughts that you have that you'd say,
Yeah.
hey, this is from my experience.
Right.
Keep
Well-
your eye on, stay focused on this stuff. Or
Well, maybe it's where I'm at in my career, but when I was younger in my career, it was all about the technical aspects, and as a project manager, cost, schedule,
Yep.
technical, right?
Remember that.
And maybe with a little bit of risk. So, hey, just lay out the job and you execute the job. As I get older, I kind of realize that it's all about the people doing the job, because you just won't get anywhere if you don't take care of your people, if they don't understand their job, if you don't have that communication. And, some time ago in the agency, we used to do a thing called 4D,
yeah,
right?
I remember.
So you had roles, responsibilities, authentic appreciation. Some of our listeners may be aware of those. And those kind of values, I think, are incredibly important for success. So you got to take care of your people. You have to nurture them and make sure they have all the tools to do their job, but then also make sure it all fits together.
Right.
And I guess that's how I
Yeah,
look at
and
it.
getting the team together. Yeah, what you're alluding to is the notion that we'd spend time looking at how to develop a team, and it's
Yeah.
about making sure that there's development and growth, making sure that we're clear on the future and the vision, making sure
Right.
we have a sense of roles and responsibilities, making sure there's the appreciation, openness with each other, and keeping that in mind.
And one thing that maybe sounds trite, but I'm a big fan of terminology and understanding,
Right.
because people are afraid to ask what that acronym means. It's easier in this country,
Right.
but even more so with the Europeans and Japanese. But I'm amazed at how quickly teams get tripped up on terminology. What do you mean by that? And I spent a lot of time with organization charts, and it's a lot less about the project and a lot more about communication and building those foundations. That's what I
Yeah.
would focus on in my 30 minutes.
Yeah, and we've heard
The other stuff
examples
comes.
about that where I heard we had one of these where it was someone from ESA, someone from NASA talking. The ESA person was talking about doing systems engineering. NASA person said, I finally figured that out. So what are you talking? He said, I never could see that you folks were doing systems engineering, but it worked right. Now what you're doing is we're talking about the same thing, but it's communicated differently. Now I get
Right.
it. And so that kind of gets into that. Let me get into the final, question, which you've talked about the importance of people and working with others and relationships. Talk about mentors or mentoring. How it either benefited you or any individual benefited you. What did you gain from mentoring, and how do you apply that? How do you use that with others? What's the importance of it?
Yeah.
I'll start, because I know you have a good
Please.
story. I know, for me, I've never been in a formal mentoring program, but I can point to people along my career that have been able to guide me and provide advice and show good examples of the work that needs to get done. So I think mentorship is a wonderful thing to do. I think if you get an opportunity, and even no matter where you are in your career, there's always a mentor that could be provided to, and whether it's just an informal dialogue that you have with an individual or someone that you just observe by yourself, if there's not a formal mentoring program, that there's always lessons that you can learn through the understanding the work of others. So.
Yeah,
Any
so
thoughts on the mentor?
Yeah, well, I didn't have a mentor until I took a program project management development training program, because I had these wonderful supervisors. Why do you need a mentor?
Okay.
Right?
So you had people who were doing that.
I had
informally.
people I would talk about career growth and planning, and I felt like I was whole, right? And then I said, well, you're supposed to have a mentor. Okay, great. And it turns out, oh my gosh, I was missing this whole swath of activity that I didn't realize, because if you take somebody outside your supervisory chain, it gives you that opportunity to open up and talk about things in a different way. Somebody that doesn't have a stake in your career, right? And in fact, it did work for me. I was doing one type of job, and then I had a mentor that kind of led me to another job that met my career goals. And if I hadn't had a chance to talk to that person, I might not have gotten there.
Right. Again, it goes back to the relationships and people and working things together.
Right.
So I've been told we're running over. So it went longer than, but it was a wonderful exchange. I thank Ann, I thank Joyce for your time.
It's our
And
pleasure.
three of us together, I realize, have 99 years. So if one of us had started earlier, we'd have the
100
centennial.
years.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's been a pleasure working with you and having
Enjoyed
this
it.
discussion today. Want to thank, again, we partner here at Glenn with these Master with Master series. And so we get always great teamwork and support from the organization. Of course, Kathy Clark in terms of human resources, and Martin Forkosh, the CKO, and the great team that sets up everything. I mean, and anyway, so thank you.